Recording.
Okay, well, welcome to the Finance Committee, July 30th, with myself, Rob Nato, Steve Chamberlain, Norm Goupel, and Michelle Clark. Looks like we have a few people in attendance today as well. We're still operating under the governor's emergency remote orders, so there is no location. We are on Zoom, and there's a dial-in number, and the meeting has been properly posted. Steve, do we have the minutes?
Yep, the minutes were in the folder. If you're ready to do that, I put them in the shared folder, but if you want to do it next meeting, whatever floats your boat.
Norm, did you get a chance to look at those? You're
No, let's push to the next meeting. I apologize, guys.
Okay.
No problem.
No problem. All right. So the agenda for today, unpacking revenue. Steve and Michelle will walk us through that a bit, and then we're going to do a bit of Q&A on fund balance, and hopefully enlighten us all a little bit more about how that all works and where we're at. This was an unscheduled meeting, so we were going to talk about state and federal funding, and I was going to talk about Hudson, but that's going to be our August meeting. So with no further ado, Steve, I'll turn it over to you for the unpacking of revenue.
You got it. Happy to do that. Let me just make sure I share the right screen. So can you see revenue SB December?
Yes.
Perfect. So, and Michelle, make sure you chime in. So a little bit, and there's a lot of attention to this number. I'll raise it up a little bit, this 641.
Yep.
So let's talk a little bit. So just to bring us back to a year ago now, or actually a year ago June, where it was a biennium and the governor and the legislature were putting together the budget. So we actually ended June without a budget, a state budget. So we didn't know what revenue we were going to get. They went to what's known as a committee of conference, which is Republicans and Democrats get together and work together and bring something to the governor. It wasn't until October that the state finalized its budget and let us know that we were getting an increase in adequacy of $641,000. And when Michelle and I heard, that was a good day for us. Talked to Dave Luna, who's a rep who was part of this, and Mel Myler and from Hopkinton, and that was a good day. Now, the timing of this is important because if we got this revenue in January, February, March, you do different things than you do if you get it when you're building the budget. So, so the budget, we got it right before we were building the budget, so the board had some flexibility. So just to bring the community back, it was a very difficult budget year. I know this might sound crazy, but the superintendent's budget reduced program, and it was a increase of over $1 million. I cut third grade. We cut no growth at all, cut third grade. And so the expense presentation was difficult for the board and the community to swallow. And then we went into the revenue presentation, which is the second meeting. And Michelle puts it together and looks at all this and what the tax impact is. So there's a couple of things. If you look overall, and I'm going to show you a new copy without the bond, but all this is our revenue, and it goes to, so there's a lot of sources of revenue, and sometime we can actually unpack. So tuition and interest earned and food service and building aid and special ed aid and child nutrition. So there's a lot of factors that go into revenue. The biggest revenue we get by far is the state adequacy. Right underneath that, it is revenue, but it's funky because that is raised locally. That's part of the Hopkinton community taxes, the SWEP. But this number, this 3.3, is coming directly from the state. And we like that 640 number, but we also had a decrease in special education aid of 172, a decrease of 10 here, a decrease of 38 here, a decrease, obviously the bond. So the two big numbers that the board has control over, that you have decisions to make, is right here. This 150 was how much the goal was we had to have at the end of fund balance. Now this is, remember, December, okay, in January. The board said we are going to reset the fund balance. It was getting so high. Look, it was 560, 480, 470, 464, and I'll fill in this blank in a second. So we reduced, $314,000 less came from fund balance. Now, why did the board do that? The more fund balance you have, the more conservative you have to be in implementing a budget. So as you've all heard, the last 2 or 3 years, the budget has been, we call it frozen. It's higher scrutiny. So I was approving every PO because we had to get to that 464. That's a high number. If we don't get to the 464, then we can't predict accurately this 145. And Michelle, and she's been doing this long before me, that number, the tax impact is a hard number. Yep.
I'm just going to jump in and just make one question. I think it'll come up later when we talk about fund balance in particular. So when you say the 150 is built in for the budget, in layman's terms, are we saying that we are stating that at the end of the year, we will have $150,000 left in surplus?
Exactly. So, and that would be the smallest number that Michelle and I've ever worked with, which means we can implement the budget and give the board flexibility at the end of the year. Because if there is $400,000 at the end of the year, there's $250 that the board can do something with that wasn't allocated in the budget process.
Right.
And we'll talk a little bit when we get to the questions about what the options are. But this is where it gets complicated. The board, we wouldn't be able to reset that fund balance if we didn't have that 640. That 640 allowed us to take a $314,000 hit because we had increased revenue from the state. And that gave the board more flexibility, and it gave us the ability to hedge against that lack of revenue in FY22. The other big number is this 175. That 175 is a withdrawal from the tax rate stabilization fund. So because we got the 640 and because of all this, the board said, look, we're going to really be conservative on fund balance and we're not going to take anything from the unreserved because we have this. And so all that reduced our revenue instead of like 600,000 deficit to about 100,000 deficit. And next year, because we didn't take any from the tax rate stabilization, we have that in reserve. Like if the board said, Steve, we want to take another 150, we'd have nothing left over for next year.
Right.
So this is all our revenue. Now the 640, the question is it baked in? And in full transparency, the commissioner, Dave Luno, everybody, when we got this, said, don't count on this in future years. Now, what if they did say, you're going to get that 640 every year for the next 5 years? Well, then some districts, and maybe we would have, probably not this year, but in some year, we might have expanded our program. A curriculum director, because we have all this new revenue and we count on it year after, that would be baking it into the operating budget, putting increases into the operating budget because we had this increase in revenue. We didn't do that. We didn't, as you know, and you know very well, we didn't. Even the Liz Durant board, Jim and Norm and Matt and Billy, they didn't expand program. They cut 3rd grade, they cut 6th grade, they cut a library media assistant, they cut all assistant coaches, they cut a lot of stuff. So we didn't bake this in, buy something, a social worker, an assistant superintendent, and if we did that, we're upping the budget, including expenses and reducing revenue in the year. So we didn't bake it in, but we did use it to offset other decreases, and we used it to reset the fund balance and not take anything from Article 10.
I'm going to slow you down there for a minute. So used to offset, say those two things again.
So because we had the 640, we could we could reduce the fund balance by 314.
Yeah.
And because we had the 640, we didn't have to take anything from the tax rate stabilization to balance the books.
Right. Just want to make sure we're getting that
so it helped us in the budget development, but we didn't buy new stuff. Now, maybe, I'll be honest with you though, we probably did cut less, right? If we didn't have this 145, that 640 is 83 cents on the tax rate. The board, I'm pretty sure, Norman, you sat at that table and it was very difficult. There's no way we would have presented a $2.25 budget to the community. So it helped us.
No
but
way.
then we wouldn't have reset the fund balance, and we would have probably taken some from Article 10, but we didn't have to because we had additional. But we didn't buy things. We didn't commit the district to new positions, but we probably did cut less. So let's take a look at the newest sheet. And thanks, Michelle, for putting this all together. So this is what's changed. And for this one, Michelle took out the bond, so it was easier to look at, right? The bond is revenue, but it's an expense side. She just took it out. So here's the 172. Here's the 640. So this is this board's budget and revenue. You see this dollar, the 7 cents. This is your work now, Rob and Norm and Jim and Andrea and Seth. There's the 640. But this is what happened from, now what happened between that $1.45 and this 07? A lot happened. The teacher's contract didn't pass. The contingency fund didn't pass. The budget has been reduced by hundreds of thousands of dollars. And we've increased the fund balance. This was 150. It's now 390. So that $240,000 directly went to reducing that tax rate. And we know about, right, we know the teachers, that original one that I just showed you included a teacher's contract, included the contingency, and included everything. And obviously some things, right, in the first meeting in May, it didn't pass, so Michelle processed that. So with the increase to 240 that the board chose, that was at the very beginning about increasing the fund balance because of stuff we didn't use due to the pandemic. Now we had more, we had $131,000. So the tax rate is 07, but one real important thing, and Michelle documented is here, the board put, last year we had 156,000 in Article 10. It's now $394,000, the highest amount in savings that the district's ever had. And that's a really, so one of the questions is, so what happens next year we don't get the 640? And that's a concern, right? Especially because of the economy. Well, all the items that are going to impact revenue is this whole list. Like Rob, one of the things that you've talked about with me, and you want to do a listening post in the fall, is this number right here, tuition.
Yes.
Right? If this is, say, I think it's about 5 or 6 kids, right? The board approved them a couple of weeks ago. But what if we doubled that? That's 70, that would go up here 70, that offsets any decrease. And we've had it as high as 113, Rob and Norm, right? It was higher.
Yeah.
So this is something that, and Rob, I think you probably went to that meeting years ago. We had a listening post about this, about making that number bigger. So who knows what's going to happen there? So we don't know about special education aid. Look, in 1920, it was huge. We go back, it was low, right, years ago. And so it's at 206 to start. We don't know what that's going to be. Maybe it's higher. That's a difficult one to predict. This is the 640. We don't know. Now here's when the board put, and I absolutely agreed with it, when this went from 150 to 240, that reduced some of our ability to leverage that loss of 640. Because if we started at 150, we could get to 450 and have 300,000 of increased revenue. You with me?
Yep.
And that would be in line with our past 5 years. But to start at 390 and add 250, that would be 640. That would be really hard unless we're fundamentally changing our practices due to COVID and the pandemic. But as your superintendent, once we went to 560, we might be able to get to 560 for you, and that would be 170,000 there to offset the 640. You with me?
Yep.
And the other one is here. We took 0 from Article 10. We have 394 to work with. Maybe next year, if we don't get the 640 and we're really hurting, we take 350. That would give us 50,000 reserve. That's tighter, but if the board really wanted to offset that 640, we've got 150 from fund balance. Let's say 300 there, that's 450. And what Michelle did here, right, we have 0 in Medicaid. You know, remember we're getting some checks. I talked to Mandy and Michelle and I are going to review it, but we're looking at probably 50 there. That's
Right.
what Mandy's first blush was 50. So in all transparency, can we get right now, based on what I'm looking, to offset the entire 640? That would be hard, but we're not also in a place where we're not going to offset any of it. We've got 400 in reserves, and we've got the lowest fund balance we've had in 8 years. So there is some capacity within board decision, if revenue comes in much lower, to make some financial decisions so we don't start in such a hole of 83 cents.
Steve, does the Medicaid reimbursement, if we are remote in the COVID environment, does that have a great impact on our ability to get Medicaid reimbursement, or does it not matter because we're still servicing those students?
That's a good question, Michelle, and I don't know if you can weigh in. Some of our services will still be delivered, and we've certainly if it's at a out of district placement and they're still working with that, I feel pretty good about that. And so this year, Michelle, do you know how much billing we got during the COVID at all?
No, because unfortunately, all I get is the checks. I don't get the detail, but I can tell you, like, when kids weren't being transported there, but they were having, it is going to affect us, because when kids go on a regular non-COVID situation, they get transported and they have tuition. So there's a transportation cost and there's a tuition cost and seeing service providers. In a COVID world, it might mean they don't go on a bus. They still get services, but it's done remotely. And this isn't everybody, but it is some. It just fluctuates. So it is possible. To what extreme, it really depends on how cramped things down are. If that makes any sense, you know, how hard it is that we're going to be asked to not do things again.
But we also remember, if we're, our expenses may drop as well. So you might have some fund balance because we didn't have to implement all those lines. So something like this is, can you still see this? This is what Michelle put together about tuition and transportation. And it's funny, I was pointing to it and you can't see it. It's funny. I thought it was funny. So some of these areas too, like we had some more money left in other places. Tuition out of district, right, was 33,000. So we don't know yet, but the revenue, we did okay. We provided some capacity to hedge against the loss of the 640, $400,000 in tax rate stabilization. Again, the most conservative fund balance. What we didn't do was Michelle didn't budget 150 for Medicaid. Knowing, you know what I mean? And we didn't budget. We didn't. I don't want to say cheap, but we didn't aggressively. Michelle, to her credit, we are conservative on our estimates because it's always to be better, right? It's always to be heavy than light in this area.
And it's also, I mean, this would be not to create an overly rosy picture, but given what's being talked about in the U.S. Senate, you would think that there's going to be some COVID money in some way, shape, or form coming forward this year.
Michelle, how did I do? Did I okay? Did I offend you at all, or Michelle?
Oh, you did good. You did good.
Okay, so our revenue picture is complicated and it's difficult to predict. Even the state, like I took a look. Imagine, right in 2015-16, we got 1.9 million from the state. This year we got 3.3. Now 1.9 million, Rob, you might remember that was the smallest enrollment we had within 20 years. And that made sense, right? Because we get 3,500 per child. So we were about 850. We're now 160 kids more times 3,500-ish. That is about $400,000, $450,000 of more adequacy. And that is more stable because that is 3,500 is not discretionary. And that's what Dave Luno said. This 640 wasn't baked into the formula. So it didn't become an entitlement. It was an additional. if it baked into the adequacy formula, instead of 300 or 500 per kid, we got 4,500 per kid, which is about, then we would count on it.
Right.
But we liked it, but it just wasn't part of the new legal legislative required adequacy formula.
When we tuition a student in, do we still receive state adequacy for that student?
That's a really good question, and I've gone back and forth. I think it depends. We have one student is in agreement with another district, and the district is paying, so I think they get the adequacy. But if it's a private pay and there's no, then I think we get the adequacy. But I can verify, and I think Karen Pond is actually on the call. She's the one that fills out all these equations for me. But I've talked with her before. I think if it's a district pay, because they're still taking care of the expense, they get it. Otherwise, we get it.
Because that would be important to know if we have that community listening post in terms of what we should be charging for tuition, because that could offset and perhaps make us, more competitive with other schools, but not reduce the amount of money that we're actually getting.
I will verify that, and I want to be, Michelle, if your understanding is any different than mine, I think, but I'll verify that.
No, I think it is like what you're talking about,
But before the listening post, we'll make sure we get confirmation on that, Rob.
Okay. Are we good on revenue? Are we ready to move on to detail of fund balance?
Absolutely. Yeah, I am if you're okay.
I'm good. Norma, you good? I'm just looking at the clock.
Yeah, no, that was really, really clear, Stephen, and I appreciate you taking the time to answer this question. Thank you.
No problem. And in full transparency, as I hope I'm an honor student at Michelle Clark College. That's
So the next item is just talking specifically about fund balance, and this is more of an overview. Again, sort of to get it on the record a bit about what it is and how it functions. So I've given Steve a series of questions, and we'll just sort of run through them and have a little conversation. So Steve, can you just tell us a little bit about what is a fund balance and what's the purpose of it and how it can be used, and then we'll get into categories.
Sure. So, and just remember, as we start last meeting, we talked about, we start budgeting in October, which is it could be up to 20 months before this budget is actually utilized, right? The June of the following year, we start October. So we budget in October, and Michelle is telling we budget what we know, right? And we do the best we can. But it's a long time between budget development and complete budget utilization. So some things we don't spend. And one of the things that Michelle has taught me and what's happened actually in my time as superintendent is the board has become much more transparent in what we do with fund balance since I've been superintendent working with Michelle. And years ago, if there was $100,000 left over, a superintendent was known for walking through a school and say, what do you need? And I'll just buy it for you. Now everything goes to the board, and the board does it in full transparency. So the fund balance is some things we are required to budget. For example, we budget a cost of a UNH course for so many teachers. It's like 3,500 times 40 teachers. So that's like $120,000. It just gives me issues on that. We have to. That's required by a collective bargaining agreement. We also have to budget $400 per teacher for professional development. We have to budget for that. It's actually in the contract. So that doesn't mean every teacher, that all those monies are used. So if they're not used, they go to fund balance. If a contract that we issued, in May of the year before, we estimated what it was, there's $30,000 left. That's what happened. It goes to fund balance. So we have budgeted, but there was more than we needed to implement. And that goes to fund balance. And we have to clear our books every year. Like I had a meeting with a teacher this week, and they didn't use some money in this department. They said, well, can I use it next year? Well, there aren't many savings accounts. We closed the books. Michelle is working really hard to close the books. It's not like you've talked about this, Rob, it's not our home finance where it continues. Our fiscal year ends, we have to do something with all those funds, and we begin again. So fund balance is funds that were not used, and that gives board choice over them.
So in layman's terms, it is the surplus from the year, assets versus liabilities, but we need to do something with them at the end of the year. It
Yes.
doesn't perpetuate.
Yep.
Okay. Why is it important to have a fund balance? What is it? How does it help a school district manage itself?
Making sure we have enough money. Dave used to say a certain percentage of the budget is good to have, because for example, what could happen is an out-of-district placement that we don't know about. So if we have money within the budget, we can take care. We don't have to freeze the budget, or we may not need to use the trust. So unanticipated expenses, when the board has the ability, as we talked about, to transfer and pay these down. So it gives the board more flexibility. One thing that, Michelle, we talked about this today, which is interesting. New Hampshire is the only state, or one of the few states, that can accumulate even beyond what Article 10 is, like millions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
So if we had the ability to have it just in our accounts, it could, be there for these unanticipated events. But New Hampshire is very, very tight about this. But we want to have some flexibility in some cash flow, right, to make sure that we can cover everything. And if there is something unanticipated, without necessarily going to a public hearing in a trust, because what happens if the board said no? So but it's also important, and this is Michelle Clark, it's important that we're as transparent as we can. What the community may not know is, at a school district meeting before me, the town voted the board to be authorized to expend, right? And so we don't even have to have a public hearing, but like for the maintenance trust, we don't have to, but we do. Every time we do the trusts, we have a public hearing, and every time as you've done the last 2 meetings in public, you've decided what to do with the funds. And that transparency, we hope, builds trust and understands what we're doing. So fund balance. Now, this is, I've just put up, and this is from the budget bulletin. This is the history of the fund balance from 2009. And this is obviously the tax impact of it. So we've gone as low as 292 and as high as 560. And the board has flexibility, but it's important for unanticipated expenses and important to have strong financial books. And it's important to show the community we just don't spend haphazardly. We don't use it up at the end of the year.
So let's talk about that. What can the fund balance be used for? We know tax rate. I guess maybe the better question is, what can't it be used for?
So it can't pay for positions, right? It can't, we put this, we're going to pay the superintendent this year. So the board has the ability to pay to achieve some of its goals. In the past, and what is common is facility or maintenance, which is what we did this year with the hot water heater, with the paving, with the cathodic protection. Or the board has done technology purchases, which we did this year with Chromebooks, and we did with some classroom pieces. So it's to achieve board goals. Now the board, as the board did this year, can save it, put it in Article 10. That's a cap, but we do that. And the board can also return it, which the board did this year. It's up to 200 or 390, right, in tax return, tax relief. But it could have, and it can also put in by vote at a March meeting. You could take fund balance by vote and put it in the maintenance trust, put it in the special ed trust, put it in the vehicle trust. Those are by votes, though. So how that works, and Michelle I think you have to go the order of the warrant. So if you wanted 100 in maintenance, that has to be the first article, just in case there's not enough to do those. So the board can put it away in trust. The board can immediately go to the community. It can buy CIP or it can put away. But one thing I'd like to say, all of those are tax relief.
Right.
Every single one is tax relief, because you're not buying assistant superintendent. You're not increasing expenditures of the future. CIP items, it's tax relief because you don't have to pay it later. Maintenance, tax relief. Article 10, tax relief. Going to the tax rate this year is tax relief. So everything the board has to do with it is really to reduce future taxes, whether you're buying something, right, like maintenance, CIP, or technology. but it's not to fund other positions. That would not be tax relief, right? That would increase expenses. Michelle, is that fair?
Yes, great job.
And can you what is the cap to put into to the tax stabilization? What is the cap, a percentage of that? Can we do? What is that amount?
2.5% of our net assessment.
Okay.
And so every year that does change because our net assessment does.
And this year we maxed it out, correct?
We did. I got
Okay.
confirmation from DRA what our max was, and that's what you guys did. Now, there is legislation, I think it's in the House, but they're looking to change that to increase it to be bigger than 2.5%, which that would be great.
Awesome. Thank you, Michelle.
That really would. And Rob and Norm, as you advocate with Dave and Mel and Mary Jane, giving more flexibility to districts. I think, Michelle, isn't this true? Weren't we the first district to vote for it and pass Article 10?
Yeah, we were one of the first. Yep.
And it's been a great asset, financial planning for the district. And that was New Hampshire ASBO, and Michelle did a lot of advocacy for that.
We're going to get a little into the weeds here of how this fund balance is broken into different categories if we can, because it's not all one big pot. So there's the four, and I'll just roll through what the categories are with some examples. And Steve, if you could give us some specifics of what we might find there. So the first one is the restricted fund balance for things like endowments. What would that look like?
I think Michelle's going to take this one, Rob.
Okay.
All right. So that would be if someone left money, and it would be that the interest earned could be used. You could reserve the interest.
All right. And that's not something we currently have, right?
Correct.
Correct. But that'd be a good thing if somebody wanted to endow the school district. With a little pitch there.
Exactly.
And then there's the committed funds. This is where we see the trust funds, the Article 10, and specified board projects. So what might be some examples there?
Right. So what would be here is you have amounts voted in. So if the board decided to vote in funds to withhold for a specific purpose. So let's say, actually, I step back. Not the board, at town meeting or school district meeting. If there was an article to put money in a trust fund and have it come from fund balance, or have a portion of it come from fund balance, that would be in the committed area under reserve for amounts voted. So there's like different categories. If some people on the Zoom have ever looked at a DOE 25 or an MS 25, they kind of break out a little bit more detail, but not to get into too much of the weeds. But
Okay. And then we have fund balance that could be assigned for certain contingencies or open POs. What might be some examples of when we would do that?
sure. So what happens is sometimes we have a contract with somebody, but for whatever reason, it wasn't fulfilled all the way and it had to go into July. Then that money, as long as it's a legal contract, or like something that happened June 25th was the board voted in $100,000, right, for technology. Well, Matt was able to get the PO in right away for like just under $97,000. So that is actually a reserve for encumbrance because of the fact of we did solidify with the company that we gave them the PO before June 30th. If we didn't do it before June 30th, but the board made action, then it would be underneath the committed for a certain thing.
Right.
But it wouldn't be to a specific vendor because maybe we don't know that vendor yet. Or it was done after June 30th, like what was done, and you can't go backwards. You just reserve it though.
Yeah. And then probably the biggest one is the unassigned that goes against the tax rate. Is that correct?
Correct. And that is really, I hate to say it as a balancing item, but it's the easiest way to understand it is that after you have assets, you take your liabilities away and you talk about all those reserves we just talked about, and those go all away. It's whatever's left has to get returned to the taxpayers in the tax rate setting process.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's clear. That's great.
Norm, did you have any questions there?
No, this is a great breakdown. Thank you both.
Okay. I think Steve, you already led off with the primary concern about the 641 and what it's being used. So I think we've covered that ground, and I'll just leave that in case there's anybody on the call who wants to have some questions. Do we have that last year's audit of the fund balance that we can put up just to show people how this is seen by the state? So I'll let you guys take it from here. Yeah, I think that's the one, right? So this is from last year.
Right, as we've already shown, the 464 was a number we used last year. So this is after we get audited. This is, I think, Michelle, this is actually a section from our audit.
Correct.
So last year, or what caused the 464, we had $200,000 in salaries, which means we didn't fill all the positions, or we hired at less than we thought we were going to in the budget process. Benefits, we actually we had some again planned changes in a good way on that side. Equipment, early retirement, we didn't pull the trigger on all, but early retirement is like course reimbursement. We have to budget a certain number of early retirements, and if we don't get the certain number, then that goes into surplus. We got more revenue than we anticipated. We had some contracted service savings, some postage. Now, we had to cover some transportation, some prepaids, some vehicle replacements, and the school district. After covering all that, the assets and liabilities, and we took 175 fund balance we used, we had 464, 635 left. And this is an audited number, and this is why the board had to do all that work in the last couple of weeks. Our auditors are actually remotely looking at our books right now. They're in district right now. They've been here since, Tuesday or Wednesday, and Michelle's been working with them all the time. And so we will have this produced from the audit. It'll go to the board. As the audit goes to the board, then it'll be available to the community.
Thanks very much. I suppose just a question on this one. So when we overspend in transportation, that's more likely than not out of district kind of stuff.
Right, and then
it's pretty costly.
What Michelle does, and actually we have a couple of budget transfers coming next Thursday, right, Michelle?
Yes.
So that means there was budget transfers. Michelle finds a line that was over, recommends to the board to transfer it into there, so we pay it within that line. And I think there's a policy about the board transferring money, and it is an action item. So all this is very transparent. We will talk about why we were higher in this item, lower in this one, why we do it. So we truly do try to be transparent for the community.
So then the last question on the who wants to learn more about fund balance game here is sort of came about because of the Senate bill, that's currently poking around talking about 65 to 70 billion dollars in COVID for schools and being distributed on a per capita basis. So I did my little math, 59 million students in the country. That's $1,150 or $1,150 a kid. That would be a lot of money for Hopkinton, over $1 million bucks. Some wishful thinking, but if you were to get a large sum like that, that's not restricted. So how does that work for the board in terms of dealing with those funds and what it might be able to use it for?
It's a good question. One of the things, I guess our most similar time was during the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, ERA funds during the banking time. Yeah. In the first year of ERA funds, so Michelle puts in the budget a line for as much revenue, federal revenue, that we can receive, and we had to up that during the ERA time because the town gives us as much as we can possibly spend, right? We can't spend above that. And during ERA, we raised our federal line so we could receive ERA money, and we used ERA money for we built the ADL room at the secondary school. That was one of the ERA projects that we did. So if we want to make sure that we have enough room to receive that, and that would be, I think Michelle has done a good job of making sure we have enough capacity. But if it's like, we've got $44,000 of CARES funds, that is restricted to only related to expenses COVID that can pay for masks, that can pay for things like that. If we had $1 million unrestricted, boy.
Well, and here's the thing, you don't get the money unless you spend it. So they don't give it to you. You have to, like, we haven't even applied for our grant yet for CARES. So we don't get our money until we actually spend it all.
So you have to
And
have a
so
plan.
you have to put activities in, and the state has to approve it before you even spend it. And if they approve the activity that you want to do, then you can go and spend it. And then every month we do a reimbursement request for each grant that we have.
So we'd have to plan for $1 million in order to get it from the state.
Well, it has me a little concerned. If they have $1 million potentially coming, we're going to have to, in the 2021 budget, up our federal projects again.
Yeah.
Because the thing is we can't over expend the bottom line, whether you have the revenue or not.
Yeah.
So, and because our federal projects budget is wrapped in with our whole budget, yeah.
Rob, you're dreaming big, Rob, for 1 million. I'm gonna say that.
No, I think it's great if it's true.
I love it too.
Yeah. That bill's got a long way to go, but
Yeah.
hopefully we see some fun. I'm just curious as to how you would manage those kinds of things.
At our next meeting, we're going to talk about state and federal, the federal grants. I know Norm really wants us to unpack that. I'm willing to do, and so there are restrictions to our Title II, our Title I, our IDEA, but we'll talk about that. And Michelle just articulated very well. We have to tell the state how we plan on spending it. They approve it, and then they reimburse us on an approved activity. But we've done some really good things in the past with some of our federal funds. So I look forward to unpacking that a little bit and talking with you about it. Maybe sometime when we get back to more normal. I know Matt and Bridget Gaddy would love to come and talk about our Title IV grant that we did some really cool stuff with. This was pre all this madness when we were back, but it's really cool what we've done for a keyboard class at and the technology we have now available for some of our work. So I'm hoping we can do that, and that's an example of what we've done with our federal grants.
All right, so I think I'm gonna see if anybody who's in attendance has some questions. Take time out of your Thursday afternoon. You should have the opportunity to ask some questions. So if anybody's listening in and has a question for Steve or Michelle or a comment, now would be the time. I think you put your hand piece up. Looks like all's quiet over there. Okay, I think we're probably in good shape. Norm?
Yeah, no, that was, I want to say, great job, Steve, explaining that. Same thing with you, Michelle. And, I definitely want to use this as Diane says she's she just messaged me saying she's on a phone, can't raise hand.
Oh.
So maybe add her to the discussion. Perfect. Glad I saw her message. There she is. All right.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Hi, Diane. Yep, we can hear you.
Hi. Great. Good discussion. I've learned a lot, and I appreciate all the effort you've put into putting this special meeting together on such a beautiful day when we could be doing something else. But it's important, and I appreciate it. I wanted to ask more about the less fund balance, the 391, 530, 25. Because in looking at this revenue sheet, this was my question. When somebody, I'm going to back up a minute. Let me back up so you understand why I asked the question at the last meeting. Is that there was a graph put out showing the drop in the tax rate, and it was very simplified. Here it goes. It's down to 7 cents. And I just found it wasn't really telling the whole story because we didn't know why. How were you able to bring it down to 7 cents? And from all I can calculate, it's from changing this number to 391, 530, 25. Am I correct about that?
So how we got from in December $1.45 all the way to 07 in July?
No, just recently we were at, I think this was Steve Reddy had put this on Facebook, and this is how the conversation began. It was going from 26 cents on
Okay.
530 down to 07.
Gotcha.
And I keep trying to find, because the budget is very difficult to understand. I'm looking forward to changes in the future. And it takes a lot of work, as we can see, to make it clear to taxpayers, voters, what's going on. The only thing I could clearly see is the change in that number. It increased to 391, 530, 25. And it appears to me that by switching it to that side of the column, that brought the tax rate down to 7 cents.
But there was also
Is that true?
there was a change also on the expense side because we cut more stuff.
And here, and I'll share it with you. So, right, the last version, Diane, is this one, where
I can't see. I can't see. I'm on the phone.
I'm sorry, I wasn't thinking. So
I've been listening to you and thinking I'll check that out when I can look at the recording through the meeting.
It started, so the board cut
Steve,
$492,000.
put it on your screen so she can see it when she watches the video again.
Gotcha.
Maybe that would help.
No, sorry about that.
Perfect. Sorry about that.
No, you're right. So when you get a chance to watch the tape, when Rob presented, and I appreciate it, and I think he used the word the austerity budget, but on certain aspects of it. So that there's a blue, green, yellowish, and light green chart. The blue was reductions of almost 500,000, went from 4.3, and that's how we got, including all the articles, Diane. And so the contingency fund didn't pass, the teacher's contract didn't pass. So all that was resolved down to a 7-cent tax impact, and it's now on the screen that you can see it. So how they got all the way from the beginning was change in revenue, but also, as Michelle just said, a reduction in expenses and applying all the articles that are now been resolved.
Okay. I guess I'm a little bit more clear, but still not real clear. I just trying to think of another. So if I were to look at the difference between 391, 530 and what the number was before, that would equal the cuts that you made.
No, the 391 is revenue. That's the fund balance. That's what's left over. The board cut the expense side of $492,000.
Okay, and I'm gonna, because I can't get online and I can't get a visual, I'm just gonna ask another question, and then I'm gonna watch the meeting. I don't want to confuse more people who are listening, or because this has been a great meeting. So the 391, when it's put into this fund, is that in any way guaranteeing that it's not going to be, this is what you're looking to not spend next year and have left over? Is it guaranteed? I say guaranteed, and I'm just saying that lightly because I want to know if it is guaranteed opportunity to keep the tax rate down next year.
So the 391 is a number that we are ending this year with, and the board will start with that next year. If we keep at 391, then there is no change on that component of our revenue. If the delta would be 0. If the board says, Steve, make it 150, then we'll be short 240 in revenue. If the board says, Steve, make that 390 550, then we will have an increase of $160,000 in revenue. And the board, and it's true, the board has to choose a number, selects a value in the budget process, so Michelle can calculate that tax rate. And then we work really hard to deliver on that number. In the time that Michelle and I have been working together and before me, we have made that number. Sometimes we froze in the budget to make sure there was 464 because we said there was 464, which means if a teacher wants something that I don't think they really need, I meet with them and say, nope, not this year. Even if it was budgeted. And sometimes they get tricky with me. They said, Steve, we budgeted this. Yep, but we had some unanticipated. One year we had significant in our student services, so I had to trim the other areas because of that. Not eliminate program, but in my judgment, believe that we could deliver what we did without that.
Okay, so in some way, it's a promise to the taxpayers or the voters that, you know, this is the effort you're going to make.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. That answers my questions. I feel better about it. Thank you.
Steve, can I, just for my own clarification, so another way of thinking about that 391 fund is it's carryover revenue from one year to the next that is set aside and targeted. If you were to have some expenses that were higher in an area, perhaps special ed or somewhere else, then you'd seek to make that balance up somewhere else in the budget.
Yeah, I mean, that the board decides in, usually in December, based on the budget, Steve, we're going to go 500,000 in this because that's all we can do. You're going to have to cool spending this year because we got to make that tax rate. And this year we're able to reset it because it got so difficult because of the 640.
Right.
So Diane, our promise to you is 7 cents right now overall increase on the tax rate, and we have to manage that specifically through the whole year. So there's no like borrowing.
Okay.
So.
But that's going to be set in September.
Yeah.
We like that.
Okay. Can you still hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so, all right, and this is always my effort, and, you know, when the charts come up and whatever on Facebook, social media, or anywhere, I'm always trying to clarify. And I'm only saying this to inform people, not to start an argument or anything, but we still do have teacher contracts coming forward. So it's 7 cents plus anything the teacher contracts, if they were to pass, would have in them. Just so that we're totally aware of what we're voting on the 18th.
If we were to vote on a new teacher contract, you're correct. That would be a separate item, but that would be something before the town, either at a special meeting or if it were to lapse till March. So that is not in this scenario, but that would be up to taxpayers when the time were to come.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. Thanks. Thank you very much for the clarity. I appreciate it.
And Diane, feel free to come on by anytime if you want to talk.
Okay, I'll probably rewatch this and I'll have some questions for you. Thanks.
Sounds good.
Thanks,
All
Norm.
right. You're welcome.
So anybody else have a question?
I'm just pretty glad I pushed recording. I can tell you that.
Yeah, that's good.
I reminded you.
I'm glad you did.
Yeah.
I'd be panicked right now if it wasn't recorded.
So if there's no other questions, then we will see everybody at our next meeting, which is in August, the 13th, I believe.
And we may want to look at moving that because that's a pretty busy week, Rob. We've got 3 meetings that week.
Right. Yeah. And we got the vote on Saturday. So when I get back from vacation, Steve, maybe we'll make an adjustment there.
Yeah, but having one in 2 weeks with all that, I think we'll be okay if it's all right with you.
Yeah.
When you on vacation? Next week?
Yeah, I'm taking off Saturday, so.
Well, you have a safe trip.
We shall do that.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Everybody okay?
Great job.
Michelle.
Thanks,
Michelle,
Michelle,
thank
very
you.
much.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Norm.
All right.
Good one.
Bye.
Bye.